All right. Hi, everyone. So we have Salma with us today, and we'll be talking about fasting and the benefits of fasting, how it helps us connect to ourselves, and it goes beyond the physical, it's beyond food, it's beyond the whole craze that usually comes with Ramadan. So we're taking you a bit closer to yourself, and we hope you enjoy this, and feel free to comment anything at the end. So Salma, so nice to have you.
Hi,
And
Tasneem. Hi.
And the reason why I really wanted you for this topic is because I feel like we both agree on how easy it is to disconnect from food once you realize that it's not really essential for life. Something that I think most people
Yes,
will find a
definitely.
bit weird that we're saying that, but we'll explain. It will all make sense, I hope, soon. So do you want to give
Yes, I
me
think
go ahead.
yeah, there's a bit of a lag, sorry, but I think for many people, the spiritual pursuit has a lot to do with food. And in the beginning, I think many of us have entered that field sort of through disordered eating. So you wouldn't recommend fasting on the first go. But as you deepen your relationship with yourself and so God and others, you begin to really realize that indeed less is more and you can be nourished through many other sources.
Exactly. Thank you. So I'll be asking you a few questions, and then we'll be sharing a bit more about food in a separate video. So my first question for you is, so when we fast, we tend to get a lot surfacing because suddenly there's nothing going down. There are no liquids going down, no smoke going down, no food going down. So suddenly everything else that has been suppressed comes up. And that tends to be emotions and anything repressed. So it tends to be emotions, feelings, sensations, possibly desires and thoughts, but these are sometimes easier to ignore than feelings, because they're less embodied. So how do you deal with that when you find that, for example, like certain anger is coming out or anxiety?
Yes, so of course, when we speak of fasting, we're speaking of purification. And you have the aspect of purifying on a physical plane, and that is actually cellularly you're regenerating, and the waste is sort of eliminating just through you not interfering with the process of your body. And then, of course, that in itself triggers, but also we have the biggest aspect of purification that is spiritual. And when we speak of spiritual purification, we're speaking of emotions. So the gateway to knowing yourself is essentially your emotions. And fasting, the idea of abstaining and not consuming sort of brings to light our coping mechanisms, and it helps us really see what needs healing and needs to be worked through. So of course, for most people, even for myself, I mean, I've been fasting growing up in a Muslim family. That happened early on, but since maybe 8, 10 years old. And I think since then, it's been really eye-opening to see starving the sense that we're so enslaved to this idea that we need to taste and consume. Once you really do that and the sense is sort of silenced in a peaceful, quiet way,
Hmm.
your sensitivities to life are really heightened, and you begin to really realize that there are so many other ways you can take in life and embrace them. And so for most people like myself, it was a really ugly beginning to feel. There is a lot of anger, and that is so valid because I don't think anyone grew up in a healthy, perfect environment. There is no such thing. That's part of how we require evolution. It needs that bit of challenge and imperfection. And so my way in the beginning was very different to my way today. So I definitely advise presence and stillness with the emotion. But for me in the beginning, and this is why we all turn to exercise and the need to constantly move, especially beginning such a lifestyle in Ramadan, it's not advisable. But to sit with it, and what you feel is kind of overwhelming, then you need to transmute it. So in that sense, it could be journaling, it could be just putting that emotion outward so you can observe it differently.
Mhm.
Of course, meditation is a great practice, especially when you're fasting, because energetically you're purified and your energy within is much more heightened to go to your upper space. And by that, I don't mean your head. I mean, most of us are blocked down there, and we need to sort of transmute it upwards to be able to channel energy not through consuming from any other sources. So I feel, yes, being present in stillness can work for some people. And that is a very good way to sort of just learn to witness and not to identify with the emotion, not to cling to it and add a narration in a story like so many of us do. Because I mean, I was one of those, but I do fully believe it's the story we tell ourselves about the emotion that will harm us more than the emotion itself.
Yeah.
And so going back to that idea of being a witness, of being passive, like spirituality is very passive to most people. It will look like you're useless. So, but it's that idea of communing with something greater and not clinging to anything, not emotions, not food, whether it's substance within or without. And so that idea of just being witnessed is a great start for most people. And then being able to channel it and transmute it can be through so many means. Some people can do it through prayers, if they're particularly faithful and religious. Others can do it through movement in a mindful manner, of course, whether it is dancing or just a few pine rolls or breath work. That is another great thing as well. Of course, being able to use breath as a guide to help you feel centered and grounded. So when you're overtaken by emotion, you're not riding the wave that it's so overwhelming and consuming for you. So I personally practice stillness, I'm able to just let it go. I feel and I know, like, especially now in the collective with all that's going on around the world, there's just so much. I'm up and down, up and down. And I'm not, what I'm grateful for is for once, I'm not trying to actively be so disciplined and grounded, because I feel this is the time where we need to be very empathetic and considerate of others. Just generally what has happened in terms of grief and also as well as what we've been excluding and not been fully seeing. So that is really important, to just allow everything to feel and not have to identify and be like, this is where it came from. You don't need to know. Like, it really does come and go. And of course, you mentioned anger. That's another case. I think anger is also a signal. So anger really asks, we look inwards and we're able to really see where we've been either trespassed or where we've harmed others, because anger is also about others, not necessarily ourselves. So yeah, so keeping that into consideration and learning about ourselves from a gentle perspective, not a there is an issue that I need to fix with me. So that's very important.
Without judging the self, I think it's difficult, but it's really it's freeing eventually.
Definitely,
And I
yes.
think also the voice, like when you mentioned that it has to come up, for me, like the throat is a great way to release. So like singing or sound, I mean, screaming, it's less beautiful than singing, but it's effective. And I think instead of, watching TV, shopping, or doing really like just like really silly distractions, releasing what's inside is a lot more, it's just a release. And I think we all need that, especially at this time.
I think that is the essence of fasting. There's so much abundance, and we're so accustomed to just taking in through our eyes, through our sight, and through our ears, and just like taste, and all our senses are constantly overworked. Even information, we're constantly bombarded with information and taking it in. So we need to align with the body, what it is doing, and with nature. It's sort of that ability to be able to just be still and allow the cleansing. And like you mentioned, sound is an amazing, amazing way to transmute. I think there's so much taboo around screaming and those noises. We were taught to restrain as children to be, well behaved, whatever that is. But I think it is so important. Yes, humming, screaming, whatever needs to be channeled. That's why chanting too is a great way to be able to do that. So that's definitely advisable as well. It's a beautiful way to transmute energy.
Yeah, like I was telling you earlier, in my dream last night, I was screaming at the top of my lungs. And I woke up feeling a bit irritated because I know that if I dreamt it, it's true. Somehow it's true. So I'm gonna have to do something today to just see what's going on inside and hopefully release it too. But maybe I'll go for something more gentle, maybe some humming or chanting or playing some opera, singing along. These are all like
Emphasis
fun.
voice on voice too. You know, when you're asserting your boundaries and it's something a bit more personal, you always use voice.
Yeah.
And there are ways that are constructive and there are ways that are absolutely not necessary. So again, like you said, yes, finding a gentle way to be able to express it, whether it is physically or vocally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you also released in the other realm, so that's a big part of it too. It's both realms working together as one.
Yeah. All right. So my, my other question for you was about, okay, so when we say that fasting is about getting closer to God, um, and in some cases, you know, back in the day, people would isolate more at that time. It was not a time to work too much, definitely not to exercise, not so much for gatherings either, I would presume. So, what's your take on that? Of being closer to yourself, being
Um,
closer to God?
Yes, so I'm a firm believer there is, of course, an aspect of the divine in all of us. I mean, if you think of our mothers passing on life, and that's a big part of who we are as well. If you keep looking behind our ancestors, there's always God or a source or a divine, whatever it is we want to believe in. So our ability to connect with ourselves help us commune better with God. And again, this goes back to the idea that you through that gift of body, because I think so many, I see this mentality here, particularly in Egypt, where they're really treating their body in a very degenerative way and dishonoring, and their health is just like, it's God's will. And it's like, but God's will is also accepting the fact that you were given a body that houses your soul, that you were given a brain, that you were given such an innate intelligence to be able to put it to use. And if we speak of Ramadan in particularly, it's all about taqwa, and that is achieving God consciousness. And of course, that requires devotion and humility and a practice of love. And it's not just something you reach in through a pill or through eating a certain way or working out X numbers of hours. It is an attitude, and it's an inner attitude that is active, and it's a process like everything else in life you pursue. Um, so in the beginning, I think it's has to be active. There needs to be a restraint of some sort. There needs to be sort of character qualities and intentions you align with and attain actively through, whether it is restraint through inaction or action, doing things in a way that align with who you want to become.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course all that begins with getting acquainted with yourself and being able to acknowledge your emotions and face them, and really use them to your own self-inquiry, and as well as the fact that your habits and coping mechanisms are revealed, you can also look at them with a soft gaze and with lightness, and be able to see what you can better do and how you can build a more sustainable lifestyle after this period of fasting. I think so many people get obsessed with perfecting the abstinence and just like, going to a full extreme with prayers and no food, and then the next month they're just doing the complete opposite, because it doesn't take into mind your needs as a human being and your pleasures as a human being. If fasting was that sort of regimented, people would do it all the time, but we wouldn't really thrive. So accepting that and being aware and bringing mindfulness into what you do and being present through it, helps you build more sustainably afterwards, whatever it is in benefit for your becoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I feel like there were times that I were like before I used to fast as a challenge. I see it as a challenge. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it all 30 days. I'm not gonna stop not a single day. And I did it because obviously, like when you put yourself in this fighting mode, you can pretty much do anything. But now my approach is so different. Now it's about surrendering completely, and really like any discomfort that I feel, I pay attention to it, because when you pay attention to that, time goes by faster actually. And before you know it, your day's over because you've been dealing with something that just has been crying for attention for so long, but you've been numbing it out with so many things. So it's interesting, like when you're talking earlier about being passive, I think that's for me, that's how I relate to it. It's just acknowledging that your inner self needs something and just shutting out from the world around and just paying attention to it without action, without challenge, just surrendering. And most of the time I spend fasting on the floor, like lying down on the floor, just in my head or in my heart, both.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I
So
think surrender is such a beautiful word, and I think that is what required every day of our lives, but now more than ever, just being able to be present to what is and not trying to actively constantly alter, because that again goes back to our obsession with control and
yeah.
thinking, we need everything in a certain alignment and a certain way of becoming so we can perceive it differently. And that is absolutely wrong. And I think fasting really helps you see how you're so the mechanism you're using when it comes to control, and how you're so obsessed with a certain idea of being and becoming. And once you let that go, you might actually just get what you wished for without doing a thing. So I think many of us have experienced that in our health journeys. You let go and you dive into your wholeness, and it just emerges everything you've been working so hard and employing discipline for into making happen. So surrender is such a beautiful, beautiful skill. Honestly, it is a skill.
Yeah. And okay, so I have one last question for this part. How
Sure.
can we extend the fasting mode after sunset? Like, how can you still be in fasting but eating? You know what I mean?
So are you talking about it more at the level of purification, like sort of
Mhm.
supporting your body, or your spiritually? I think ultimately when you support the physical, you support the spiritual. That's why I really see a connection between our ability to face what we feel and how clean our gut actually is on like a physiological level. So
Mhm.
um, you have to think of breaking the fast as importantly as the fast. I think so many people approach iftar as a communal, eat all you can eat feast because there's just
Mhm.
been a
It's a
number of meals
reward.
missed. So
It's seen as a
yeah,
reward.
that's true. There is a very oriented reward mentality with food.
Mhm.
It always is the case. So I think it's really important to remember that your body's sensitive and it will really absorb what you put in much more. And if we're speaking more on a physiological level of cleaning, sort of the process of purification, the ultimate aim of fasting for me is achieving that autophagy, which is cellular waste is recycled, and that really helps your brain health, and particularly brain cells are actually really regenerating much faster. And so the key to keeping yourself in that state is also not to start with a shoot of like ultimate amount of sugar and really high carb that can turn into sugar. So being mindful of what you actually need, even the sunnah of just eating a few dates and some water and waiting and leaving your
Yeah, I love
stomach
that.
half empty, it's so important. And if you tune into your needs, so many people around the eating table and iftar are always like, I'm not even hungry, and they just keep eating. And it's like, okay, well, you're not hungry, that's fine. I think we have a fear of a really short feeding period, and I
Yeah.
have that fear because I sleep early. So many people are just like, eat now or never, but it's really not like that. It's just a passing month, and you're meant to do things out of your regular to be able to really
Yeah.
see your character and what needs to be worked. So it's important to start light, whatever you feel called to. If it's 3 dates, for some people the sugar will not work, even if it's not natural. If it's natural, I mean, or for others, it could just be like a bit of protein, a bit of green salad, something liquid. Um, and then maybe for those who pray or whatever sort of spiritual practice you have afterwards, you can go and practice that and come back to eating like 30 to 45 minutes later. It's really just about being in tune with what you need. And
Mhm.
you can follow the guidelines, but once you're released from those guidelines, don't just like lose complete sense of self. And so that's part of it, food to guide you, as well as practicing mindfulness again. I think so many of us go through that whole, okay, so I've abided, and like you said, there's a reward, and now I'm free, like taking all the musalsalat possible, taking all the food mindlessly. And so remembering the purpose of fasting, that is like being able to commune with the divine, be able to communicate with God and strengthen your relationship, especially in the time of quarantine now for most people, where there is no, prayers in large numbers. And so you're really, really asked to go back to just you and him. And that is something you need to bring your attention to constantly if you find yourself distracted by whatever is around you, whether on TV or food or each other. So going back to that, and I think that cleansing, emotional cleansing, can be such an amazing tool for weight loss. Most people don't believe that, but
Yes,
it is. So when you do
it is.
spiritual work, you get so hungry, because and we're energetical beings, and when you're
Mhm.
clearing that sort of blocked energy, your organs really are enabled to function better, and your awareness is heightened to support you to further seek that connection and relationship with God and source. So I think keeping in mind mindfulness, keeping in mind and employing it to how you eat, keeping in mind movement too, being gentle with yourself, no such thing as I ate a lot, so now I'm going to go punish myself with more exercise.
Yeah.
It's just that idea of constantly needing to punish and sort of get a reward for our behavior needs to be dropped,
Mhm.
and just tune in, listen, and simplify. It's usually
Yeah.
really simple. Our needs are always simple.
Yeah, and actually, my next point. So